The meeting open at 9 o'clock. Thank you to everyone for coming. Note that all councillors are in attendance bar Councillor Ireland. Are there any apologies?
I think she was an apology. I'll move that her apology be received.
Yep. I understand she's running late in traffic. Is there a seconder for that apology? Councillor Harding?
Don't need to move it, just note it.
Oh, note it. Okay. Thanks, Paul. Do any councillors have a declaration of interest to make? All right then, on to the first item in the agenda, the 2020 to 2025 Indigenous Accord. Call on the relevant officer to speak to that.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Mayor. Good morning, councillors. I'd like to introduce and have talk to the report the author and Council's Indigenous Australian Community Development Officer, Derek Kinsella. So through the Chair, I'd like to introduce Derek.
Good morning, everybody. Before I start, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this country where we are meeting, and just like to acknowledge your presence here today. Thank you. This report has been prepared by myself as Council Community Development Officer from the Indigenous perspective. Also, it's been a team effort from our community development team. A working group of community members have provided the advice as necessary in this document. This report has been, it recommends the endorsement of the 2020-25 Indigenous Accord. The 2025 Accord is Ipswich City Council's strategic framework for reconciliation and community governance and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and their communities. It contains targeted and specific actions and sets the agenda for cooperation, collaboration and partnership between Ipswich City Council and the local Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. I note the draft accord is attached. Minor edits are being made to the layout and a final version will accompany this report as it proceeds to Council ordinary meeting of 30th June. The relevant officer has not recommended any further edits to the actions captured in the report. We request that the report proceed to Council for endorsement.
Right.
Yep. Any questions?
Yep. Any questions, anyone?
Do we move or?
Councillor Harding?
Mr Kinsella, thank you very much for this accord. Thank you for briefing the council at two other sessions before. And also note that you've provided us an update with the previous accord and noted that whilst a number of things have been achieved, there are quite a few things in the previous accord that haven't been achieved and they've been rolled over into this one. Are there any things in particular, because there's a lot of deliverables in this, is there, if I asked you to pick three things that you think are really important for this council to achieve, what would you select?
I would look at an employment strategy within council, so an employment and retention strategy for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. I would look at the War Memorial as an important element, and I guess for me one other area would be is a working relationship with our traditional owners. So they would be three elements that I would see as important.
Thank you.
Any further questions?
Through the Chair, good morning.
Yep.
I think we discussed during one of our briefing sessions that potentially our legal team would vet the report. Just wondering if they've had a chance to do that.
What's that?
Our legal team were to review the Accord document?
Yes. There was only one area that they were looking at, and which was the cultural leave process. We have met with people in culture, and that comes under them, under their processes, and then they will liaise in that process.
Excellent, thank you.
All right. Any more further questions for Derek? No. Thank you, Derek.
No, thank you.
Chair, I'd like to move for a variation to this recommendation, noting that not all the deliverables from the previous Accord happened, I'd like for us to have a 6-monthly report on how we are tracking with the deliverables on this.
Yep.
So Vicky, just, I guess, monitor and report 6-monthly on the Accord rather than it just come to us in 5 years' time when the Accord's finished. I think it'd be important to monitor and track how we're achieving.
Are you happy with the words on the screen when they're
It's a monitor
finished?
report. Yes, just for that to be added.
Just to be clear, the motion hasn't been moved, you're just moving
Yeah.
it. So you're actually moving the recommendation with an addition, which is that. So it's not a variation. So it's endorse the Indigenous Accord, and then the second point just needs to be pasted underneath.
Okay.
So that's called an amendment, is it?
That's the original motion.
Okay.
You're putting a motion which is different from the staff recommendation. That's all you're doing. Yeah. It just needs a seconder.
Who would like to second?
Yeah, I'll second that.
Councillor Fechner. Shall we go to a vote on that then?
Any discussion?
Any discussion? Councillor Fechner?
Yeah, I agree that I second this quite specifically. I was speaking to the Mayor about it earlier last week, that we're very conscious that this is something that in the past we haven't done very well, and we haven't put any key indicators in how we're achieving any of the outcomes from the Indigenous Accord and how the strategy fits in to our approach, particularly within the organisation. I love that Derek has highlighted a possible employment strategy for Indigenous and Torres Strait Island people within the organisation. I think that's great. But specifically to this edition here, it'll help us every 6 months bring to mind what we're actually doing about it. If there's anything that we could be working on, it keeps us in check as a council, so this Accord is not just lip service for the community, but rather we're delivering the outcomes that we're promising and that we're committing to as a council by employing this strategy.
Great stuff. Are there any further discussion? All right, we'll put the matter to a vote. Those for?
Sorry, I don't know what I'm voting for. I'll just abstain for this one.
So the vote is for. We have Councillor Fechner, Councillor Doyle, Councillor Jonich, Councillor Harding, Councillor Milligan, Councillor Kunzelman and Councillor Tully with a...
Just a point of order, Chair. My concern is that because Councillor Ireland's just arrived, and her abstention will be marked as a negative, and I
You may not want that.
yeah. So we're up to
It's
the
on item
first
1.
point, which is the Indigenous Accord.
Oh, okay.
So I just want to be clear, if you're going to say that you abstained, to say why. Otherwise, it'll be seen as though you voted against the Indigenous Accord.
Through the Chair, maybe we can just clarify what exactly this amendment was that the Mayor was making, noting that Councillor Ireland has probably read the report and it would be easy to follow.
Let's just chill for a moment then and allow Councillor Ireland to get set up.
All right.
The Indigenous Accord.
And we're going to accept it as it was, no changes.
And through the Chair, add the recommendation that we would report 6 monthly.
Okay, all right, I can vote in the affirmative for that.
Okay, so it's unanimous.
My apologies to everyone.
All right. Do we get everyone to raise their hand again?
No, just record Councillor Ireland's vote in favour.
Councillor Ireland votes in favour as well, so that's unanimous. The motion is carried. On to item 2 for today's agenda. We have the City of Ipswich parking pricing strategy. Let's call on the relevant officer to lead the discussion on this.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Mayor Harding, and good morning, councillors. My name is Tony DeLeo. I'm the Manager of Infrastructure Strategy within the Infrastructure and Environment Department. So this report is concerning the development of the City of Ipswich parking pricing strategy, a key deliverable of IGO, which is the City of Ipswich Transport Plan. The strategy has been prepared to provide guidance for decision making on parking management in the city, including the management of time restrictions and priced parking. Parking is one of the biggest challenges facing local governments, and in the past, price parking areas have been established on an ad hoc basis in response to high parking demands and in isolation of overarching policy. This strategy provides a framework for price parking, allowing council to respond to different parking contexts in a systematic and consistent manner. The strategy identifies 7 broad objectives for price parking and 7 broad recommendations are made. The broad recommendations within the strategy are summarised in the report. A summary version of the strategy has also been developed, and that summary document has been developed and can be used as a more concise communication tool. This guideline provides further guidance to council officers implementing the parking management frameworks. As part of the development of the strategy, significant consultation has been undertaken, both internally and externally. A questionnaire results and summary report of the community consultation is attached in the report. Based on the community feedback, it is proposed to undertake 2 trials within the city. The first being a 15-minute free grace parking period, and in addition, it is also proposed to commence a 6-month trial regarding the removal of Saturday timed and priced parking. So in conclusion, the report is asking council to resolve 5 recommendations, including the endorsement of the strategy and implementation of the 2 parking trials.
I'll open it to the floor for questions. Thanks, Tony. All right, no questions.
So you think, Tony, he goes away,
Thanks, Tony.
and then
Well, it's giving them a moment. Very good document.
now you're seeking mover and seconder.
I'll seek a mover to adopt the recommendations. Councillor Doyle. Seconder. Councillor Milligan. Any discussion?
Through the Chair, I would just like to speak to Recommendation E, that Council commence a 6-month trial regarding the removal of Saturday timed and priced parking within the Ipswich City Centre. I think that's a great initiative, and I'm really pleased to see that within the recommendations. Our CBD has been struggling, as everybody knows, for a very long time. Our businesses are struggling. We are desperately trying to attract our residents and visitors to our CBD. So that would be a great initiative regarding parking on a Saturday. Particularly Saturday mornings, a very busy time around the cafe and retail scene within the CBD. So it will be a nice addition for our retailers and residents.
I agree with Councillor Doyle in that it seems to a lot of us that this was a bit long overdue. There are people who operate their businesses within the CBD who have been struggling for a long time to reconcile that the parking strategy or lack thereof didn't reflect the needs of the community, and haven't for a long time, not since we saw mass exodus from the tenancies down in the mall, and since sparked the redevelopment of Nicholas Street there. So I think that it's fair to say that yes, we're bringing this up to scratch, and we're doing our best to deliver a good outcome for the locals. And I just want to say that I think that this parking strategy will serve the locals well. But I look forward to seeing what the outcomes of the trials are as well. It might not be working for people, but if we have that flexibility and the community consultation is good, and we as a council will have to make sure that it is, to make sure that we have the best outcomes for the local community.
Councillor Harding.
Thank you. Through the Chair, CEO, I just want to commend you and your council officers. I thought that not only the strategy was excellent, but also attachment 1 was excellent. They went to a lot of detail on occupancy rates. It was very thorough, and it gives me a lot of confidence in moving forward with this pricing strategy being recommended. Thank you.
Councillor Milligan.
I note that in item 5 of the strategy, the periodically review data, that it is recommended that at least every 12 months that it be reviewed in the context of the upcoming completion of the CBD redevelopment. I think that's an important thing that we do track the changing parking behaviours of the general public, in particularly Ipswich CBD. That's something that we'll have to keep an eye on to make sure that we're relevant and up to date at the time that things change. So I believe that's one of the a very important part of the strategy that needs to be followed through with.
Yep. Any further discussion? All right, we'll proceed to a vote. Those who vote for the motion. Looking around the room, that's unanimous. The motion is carried. On to item 3 of the agenda, the development application 1421/19/MADP. I'll call on the relevant officer to lead the discussion.
Good morning, councillors. My name is Brett Davey, Manager of Development Planning. So the report before you is a report for what we call a Master Area Development Plan. It's a layer of planning in the planning framework for Springfield, akin to a small version of a planning scheme. The purpose of this particular framework is to identify land uses within the area of the Brisbane Lions Sports Stadium, the sports fields and the area immediately north of that. So this proposal was originally approved previously by full council under administration some time ago in October. Since that time, the officers and the proponents have been in conversation in an alternative dispute resolution process. The purpose of that process is to essentially negotiate any disputes that might exist between the final version that was approved and the version that the proponents would desire. We are now at a point where the proponents and council officers are in agreement on the core matters that were raised by the proponents, and I can summarise those now. They're obviously explained in detail in the report, but in summary, there were some references to other agreements in the documents. Those other agreements being infrastructure agreements and associated other agreements. There were some detailed references in the original documents that had a great level of detail about different requirements and different clauses. In lieu of that, we've agreed to just have simple references to other agreements and note that if other agreements are changed in the future or currently, that those agreements do prevail. The next thing to highlight is the idea of the Green Bridge. So there is a concept of a green bridge that was originally struck off the plans. The proponent would desire to have a concept of a green bridge explored in the location of the stadium. We've had a long discussion about that. We've come to an agreement that we leave in a conceptual idea of the green bridge. Council officers' initial concerns were that there was no technical detail to support the development of the green bridge and to identify why it was needed. We've elected instead to flag that that technical report is required, flag that there is no obligation for council to do that work or to deliver the infrastructure, but it may be considered in the future. The next one was the significance of stadium. The proponent has requested that we consider the stadium of national significance, given that it's getting funding from all 3 levels of government, which we've agreed to, and it doesn't principally change the outcome. The lighting, noise and event management space, they were concerned that to make sure that the stadium and the precinct was adequately protected from noise, light and other amenity impacts, which we believe we've got the technical reports to substantiate. And the final highlight for the council is the flooding and stormwater quality and quantity, to make sure that the precinct properly addresses those issues so there are no impacts on the community.
Thanks, Brett. Are there any questions for Brett?
Through the chair, I just have one in relation to the noise issues and the unit developments which are taking place to the north of Eden Station Drive. Has that been assessed in terms of acceptable noise limits and how that might be managed in the future?
Yeah, there's a bit of a technical exercise there, but to put it simply, the stadium must manage its impacts in accordance with the Environmental Protection Act, and surrounding uses must then mitigate the levels that are identified in the Environmental Protection Act. So there will be some work required with the units. We are working through that issue at the moment in the information request process of that particular development application, but we haven't got to a resolution yet.
Does that mean, like on the units, that there might need to be double glazing or some other construction or design about the orientation of the buildings and things like that?
Maybe not. It might be just the outdoor areas. There are standards for outdoor rec areas, but that is really speculation. I don't know the detail at this point in time. We do have to talk to the proponent of the unit proposal on that.
Okay. Thank you.
Any further questions for
Through the chair, Mr. Davey, in this particular report, by agreeing to it, will there be any additional costs to the council, to the ratepayers of Ipswich, or any other onus or obligation that they'll have?
Not that it isn't already part of an agreement. So there are a range of infrastructure agreements with obligations on both parties, and there's also an agreement which is the subject of previous council resolutions regarding the funding arrangements for the stadium itself. But these documents don't muddle with any of that scenario. It essentially is to say that development can occur in a particular form, and in subsequent development applications, which I'll talk to in the next item, there are requirements on the developer to do works, and anything else that's council funding is really up to a separate agreement.
Okay, so just to through the chair, just to clarify, that there won't be the Springfield City Group or Brisbane Lions or some other or another third party won't be asking us to pay for additional things if this is approved.
No. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
any further questions? Thank you, Brett. Would anyone like to move this? Mayor Harding is the mover there. Seconder, Councillor Doyle. Is there any discussion on this item? Right, we will proceed to the vote. Those for? Looking around the room, it's unanimous and the motion's carried. On to item 4 on the agenda. Development application 5911/2019. Call on the relevant officer to lead the discussion.
Back again, councillors. So this is an application that's pursuant to the previous file that I just discussed, the Master Area Development Plan resolution. This particular application is the detailed application which really lets us transition from a planning framework to works on the ground in terms of construction of the stadium precinct for the Brisbane Lions. So we've, I suppose, purposely dealt with these two items in parallel so that there is consistency. This development is for the stadium itself as well as ancillary uses. Upon resolution of this will permit the Brisbane Lions to go and undertake tender processes to actually construct the stadium precinct itself. Now, the proposals outlined in the report, aside from the stadium, there are some ancillary uses in there which include the head office for the Lions, I suppose you'd say, as well as some medical uses and childcare uses and a cafe and ancillary activities. Of those, the one thing I'd highlight there is that the cafe and the childcare centre and medical uses, with the childcare centre, that is part used by the employees and the players, or that's the intent, but it will also be commercially available for others to use. In respect to the medical uses, there are specific medical uses on site for the use of players, but there are also additional medical uses provided which are a commercial operation, I suppose you'd say. So on that basis, the recommendation is to levy contributions for those aspects, as in the childcare centre component that's publicly available and commercially available, as well as the aspects of the medical centre. The only other highlight I'd flag in this recommendation is in respect to access. So there are some additional works required and some more studies to determine the appropriate intersection treatments for access to the precinct, because there are two accesses, one on Springfield Greenbank Arterial and one on Eden Station Drive. So that work is required to be undertaken in the near future.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Davey? Mayor Harding?
Thank you, Councillor Madsen. Through Councillor Madsen, I note that the childcare centre and the medical centre were part of core community aspects of this program, and I'm just confused that there was it's now been called an ancillary. What's the has something happened, or what's the reason for that?
Yeah, there's two aspects there. So the first is a land use principle as to whether or not one use is dominant or subservient of another. And so you could say that a cafe in a larger shopping centre is almost ancillary to the operation of that shopping centre. So if it wasn't necessarily for the shopping centre operating, a cafe wouldn't be there. In this case, when you try to apply that reasoning to the medical centre and the childcare centre, those two things can operate independent of the stadium operating. And so my reasoning on this is that for that reason we shouldn't be considering them ancillary to the point of not waiving or not levying contributions, I should say. So the purpose of infrastructure contributions is to actually deal with the increase in demand generated from uses. Now, when those uses, if you applied those uses on the neighbouring sites or in the town centre, they'd be levied charges. And so that's the clincher for me in this case, that whilst you can mount an argument that there are parts of those uses that's ancillary to the operation of the stadium, they would otherwise be able to operate without the stadium being there.
Okay. And through the chair, probably the same question as the last one, if the council does agree to this, will there be any cost or other obligations that the council will have to implement this?
The conditions of the approval are an onus on the applicant to undertake.
Okay, because obviously at the last ordinary meeting we had, I guess, verified the up to $12 million for the Brisbane lines. So I think that was a non-binding agreement which we've proceeded with. So just want to make sure that this wasn't not another bite at the council cherry.
Yeah, no, I've purposely tried to keep those matters separate whilst I'm aware of them. It was really important to me to keep the development aspects and the DA assessment aspects completely independent of any arrangement of funding or otherwise.
Thank you, Mr Davey.
Thank you.
Any further questions? No? Would anyone like to move this? Councillor Doyle? A seconder?
I'll second that.
Any discussion?
Just to, through the chair, just to comment on a typo there in the spelling of complementary. It should be with an E and not an I.
I see.
Through the chair, maybe thought it was good looking. And to the chair, my main thing is the fact that this shouldn't be an additional cost to the council in regards to the very generous, I think, agreement that we've voted on at the last council meeting.
All right. We'll proceed to a vote. Those who are for the motion. Looking around the room, it's unanimous. The motion is carried. On to item 5 on today's agenda. We have the review of the materials recovery plan. I call on the relevant council officer. My bad.
Morning, Kate Kavanagh, Manager Environment Sustainability. This report is regarding the review of Council's Materials Recovery Plan, which was adopted in May 2017. Under the Waste Reduction and Recycling Act, local governments are required to adopt a plan at least every 3 years and review that plan in that time frame. We did do an internal review of that document within that time frame, but based on a number of pieces of work that are being done through the state government, the Commonwealth government, and just the sub-regional alliance expression of interest, It was determined that a more comprehensive and thorough review was required, and as part of that full review, there's also a requirement to do community consultation. If it's a major review, that's to be at least 28 days for that community consultation. So this report is putting forward a recommendation to accept the current plan in its current state and to commence a full review in light of those other state and regional changes to commence in July this year, and then to do a full community consultation and bring that back to council for endorsement.
Through the chair.
Yes, Councillor Ireland?
How will you do your community consultation? What does it look like?
So primarily it'll be through a number of channels, so probably social media, using the Shape Your Ipswich platform. Depending on COVID restrictions, whether we can do that in a more coordinated face-to-face type process, but that might be a little bit difficult. So the idea would be mostly through surveys, online surveys, and the Shape Your Ipswich platform.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Councillor Consultation?
Do you favour the face-to-face consultation?
In the past, we've done things like through shopping centres or community reference groups, those kind of avenues. It is good to be able to do that if we can coordinate it, particularly with key stakeholders.
I'm thinking there'd be some lively public meetings.
It tends to be more as a targeted stakeholder consultation if we do it that way. Yeah.
Thank you.
Further questions?
Yes.
Mayor Harding.
Sorry. Through the chair. Ms Kavanagh, how long does consultation normally take in your experience?
So the legislation requires if it's a full change to the plan, it has to be at least 28 days. So that making that available for feedback, and then with evaluation, you're looking at probably 6 weeks as a minimum.
Okay. Yeah. And through the chair, this was due to be done by May 2020. Is that correct?
Within the 3 years.
Within the 3 years. Was there a recommendation through council to allow for this to be deferred, or is this the first time that this recommendation is coming to council?
This is the first time it's come to council with that recommendation. We did do an internal review. The core principles of the plan pretty much stay relevant as far as the circular economy type principles. But given council's engagement in the Sub-Regional Alliance and some of the other changes that are coming through the state government release of the infrastructure plan, we felt it needed a bit more of a review, and unfortunately we didn't make that within that time frame. So the recommendation is to adopt it in its current state, but to do that more broader consultation.
And through the chair, the council's obligation to do this every 3 years, is that a state government regulation or a federal?
State government.
That's a state government regulation.
Yes.
Have we consulted with the state government about the fact that we're not meeting their time frame?
Not at this stage. We have put it in the report to get in contact with the Department of Environment and Science and communicate with them in regards to where council is at the moment. Yeah.
Okay. I'd certainly like to know about that because we didn't meet that deadline. And just a point, as we know, Ms Kavanagh, that one of my election promises was for a mining and waste roundtable, which fits very neatly into this consultation piece as well that we're working on.
Any further questions? Thank you, Kay.
Thank you.
Would anyone like to move these recommendations? Councillor Milligan, seconder. Councillor Doyle. Any discussion? Mayor Harding?
Just note that it's very important for this council to be accountable, that we are to adhere to the laws of the land. So I am disappointed that the consultation wasn't done and completed, so this didn't come to council before May 2020, would be my main point in discussion. But it is what it is, and it is a moving feast for us. But just want to note the fact that in moving forward, it's certainly my expectation that this council will be accountable and not having to do things retrospectively.
Through the chair, I think it's pretty timely that we perform the review and the community consultation while we're seeing out our 4-year term. I think that it does fit quite nicely into your mining and waste roundtable that we need to have, and I will certainly be making sure that the wider community is consulted on behalf of this issue. It seems to be an extremely divisive issue and one that lots of our constituents feel very passionately about. They're sick of, the running joke that Ipswich is just a waste dump for all other, local government areas within the state. And a lot of the feedback that I get from the community is that, you know, they feel powerless. They haven't been able to at least express their opinion or views on how we, you know, how Ipswich City Council as an organisation is tackling these issues. And I think that although it's disappointing, we are, you know, working in retrospect here, but I think that we should all here in this room make a commitment to making this some of the most meaningful consultation we do over the next 4 years, because it can really define who we are as a city moving forward. You know, what do we actually stand for? Are we going to be heard? Are we going to you know, push back on the state government when we feel powerless you know, under their regime? Are we going to stand up for our people in the community? I think these are all important questions that we get to answer as we move into the community consultation and the broader conversation around waste. I think that the materials recovery plan will be a huge defining moment for this council, and the opportunity to go out and ask those in the local community what they think about it, or you know, it's a good time to be having this conversation, in my opinion. It really is.
Through the chair, I concur with Councillor Fechner in relation to the community consultation. You know, we've heard that it will, you know, potentially be quite targeted. It's imperative that we undertake meaningful community consultation. Yet again, overnight, I've received emails from constituents regarding a foul odour within their suburb, and it's not isolated to 1 or 2 suburbs. Within Division 3, our division, it's many suburbs. So, and as Councillor Fechner has pointed out, our residents have felt powerless. They haven't had a voice. They haven't had a platform on this issue. It is imperative that they be given a say and be heard during the consultation. Thank you.
Thank you. I note that some council officers wish to add more. Would you like?
Thank you, Chair and Councillors. Apologies. I just wish to advise Council that an amendment, we've suggested an amendment to the report be included to capture the reasonings for the deferral. In fact, the fact that we're waiting on these other documentations. So the report that is in front of you, we're suggesting includes the amendments that you have on the screen there, which is also an attachment in the LG Hub minutes agenda.
Thank you. Any questions?
Oh, Mr. Dill?
Mr. Dill, sorry.
Through the chair. I do note the reasoning. I'm just saying that it's been done retrospectively, and this is not the way an accountable council needs to operate. I'd be quite comfortable if you come forward and said that in the February or March or April meeting that this was the plan, but that's not what happened. So I just, in moving forward, I want to make sure that we do adhere to our legal obligations.
More of a comment, that one?
Sorry.
Through the chair. Through the chair.
Councillor Doyle.
Given the Mayor's commitment to the community around the roundtable, mining and waste roundtable, would it also be appropriate to mention that within that paragraph? I mean, we're talking about the Sub-Regional Alliance Expression of Interest, Council of Mayors.
I think that's a matter for the council.
Okay.
If you want to move an amendment or an addition or anything to that effect.
So if you want to...
So given the importance we are placing on our community consultation, and the Mayor's Roundtable actually speaks to that, whereas some of these other groups, I guess, represent mayors and other cities and views at a much higher level than the general public. So can I move, or can I suggest a variation?
Yeah, it's up to you.
So, in addition...
Can we be really clear
So rather than...
what the recommendation
so
is? Both from here, I think the meeting needs to understand really explicitly in in the motion that's before you what you are voting on. So if we're cutting and pasting something from here, we need to know exactly what that is. And then Councillor Doyle, her addition to the motion, we should be really clear on that, and obviously the mover and a seconder need to agree to those variations.
Through the Chair, I guess we're looking at a recommendation D to make sure that the mining and waste round table consultation is also included in the consultation. Vicky, do you mind capitalising mining, waste and round? Thank you. I think it's an important part of the materials recovery plan and moving forward.
Other than the
Moved.
typo, happy with that?
Yes. Will I move that?
Would you like to move?
I'd like to move that. Thank you.
Seconder?
Was it moved before?
No.
The matter wasn't moved?
No.
Okay.
Oh,
It
sorry.
was.
It was, yeah. They'll be moved and seconded, so the mover and seconder need to agree as a variation.
Do you agree, Councillor Milligan?
Yes.
Councillor Doyle?
Yes.
Mr Chair, could I just add, just as a comment, that it's been detailed to us by council officers that the review process had been undertaken within prescribed timelines. However, I applaud council officers in acknowledging that the process with community consultation unfortunately didn't occur due to varying factors. Shows the professionalism and maturity of council officers to acknowledge that and explain that to the public through this forum. And as Mayor Harding has suggested, moving forward, let's just get on with this and undertake comprehensive community consultation by these methods that we've suggested. It's not about saying somebody did wrong or something was missed. It's acknowledged. We're grown-ups. Let's just take that on board and move forward.
All right. Any further discussion? Shall we proceed to a vote? Those for? Looking around the room, it's unanimous. The motion's carried. On to item 6 on our agenda today, the Land for Wildlife South East Queensland update. Call on the relevant officer to lead us in this discussion.
Good morning. So the Land for Wildlife South East Queensland update is in regards to the regional arrangements that have been set in place for the coordination of the Land for Wildlife program. Land for Wildlife is a really well trusted and known engagement program that supports landholders that are wanting to do conservation efforts on their own private property. And it's a program that commenced in Victoria in the 1990s and came to South East Queensland in the late 1990s. Since then, there are over 4,500 landholders within South East Queensland, of which about 200 in Ipswich, that are partners within the Land for Wildlife program. Due to some funding changes that occurred in 2018, the councils, through the steering committee, which has a representative from all 11 councils on that, came together to pull together a terms of reference and a funding proposal to continue that regional coordination. So the funding essentially covers the employment of a regional coordinator that supports all of the councils and the landholders, goes towards the database that keeps all the property owners' information in there, and provides newsletters, technical notes, web-page content, social media content to support landholders. Through the program, they also offer a number of field days as well to support landholders with their networking. They get a lot of value out of being able to communicate with like-minded people and to see what other landholders are doing in regards to conservation efforts on private property. So it's a really wonderful program, well trusted, well branded, and Council has been a partner for 20 years, just over 20 years in this program, and for the contribution of around 12,500 per year over the next 3 years, it's a very well worthwhile contribution for Council to continue to remain a part of that program.
Thank you. Any questions? No. Thank you, Kate. Would anyone like to move these recommendations? Mayor Harding, second. Councillor Ireland. Any discussion? Mayor Harding.
Chair, just note on page, I guess, 150 of our papers, the benefits. Just really impressed with, the program to protect wildlife and have households and landholders on board. In 1998 it was 138 landholders, and now it stands at over 4,500 landholders. So it looks to be a really good program, and I really appreciate the fact that the cost of the program was upfront, and I think it was a well-written report, and I feel very comfortable in supporting this.
That's great. Shall we proceed to a vote? Those for? Looking around the room, it's unanimous. The motion's carried. On to item 7 on the agenda, the disaster management policies.
Good morning. This paper is regarding a disaster management policy for Council for adoption. The disaster management policy was recognised through some work that Council did on all of its policy and procedures review recently, and was identified as a policy gap in that we did have a policy, but it really only picked up on storm damage that happened as a result of vegetation damage that happened as a result of a major storm event. The policy outlines what Council's roles and responsibilities under the Disaster Management Act are, and also the responsibilities in regards to what support we provide post an event. So it picks up on things like sandbagging and removal potential, exemptions for the disposal of vegetation following a major storm event. The policy also outlines the roles and responsibilities of councillors through disaster management as well. Under the Act, there is a nomination of a chair and or deputy chair, which currently Mayor Harding is the chair of the disaster management group for Ipswich. And it just gives a bit of an overview of what the communication channels will be in an actual event. So there is a local disaster management group that would be set up through the Disaster Control Centre, and that communication would be via a councillor liaison officer to ensure that all councillors are fully aware and abreast of everything that is happening throughout an event. So the policy has been drafted to cover a bit more than just that vegetation removal and give a bit more overview of roles and responsibilities through a disaster management event.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Thank you, Kate. Would anybody like to move? Councillor Ireland, seconder. Councillor Kunzelman. Any discussion? Mayor Harding.
Through the chair, Councillor Tully, I guess I go to you and your experience, in particular in the 2011 flood, where you lost your own home. In reviewing this policy, what are your thoughts on it?
I think it's important to recognise that the diversity of disasters. We think about flooding, but bushfires are, in the south and to the north in the Pine Mountain region. That's important. And there's been times over the years where there's been it hasn't led to a disaster, but chemical discharges. Where people happen between Redbank and Collingwood Park on one occasion. I think we've got it pretty well under control, but you can never just assume that. It's going to be confined to one sort of disaster. The other problem is if it's flooding, the city does get split. That happened in '74 and in 2011. Even the partially completed Ipswich motorway upgrade wasn't built, even with the federal funding for it, above the Q100 level. So it flooded between Goodna and or between Gales and Riverview, but I think it's a pretty reasonable sort of approach too. And you can't predict every sort of disaster. And even though we've coped with in the last few months, as I say to people, if you'd said in January we're going to have a worldwide issue, people would have said what? Except for America, of course, they'd supposedly responded already and beat the world. But yeah, I'm very happy with this.
Okay. And through the chair, Councillor Owen, in your experience too with disasters in council, what were your thoughts on the policy? Do you think it covered what needs to be?
Very good. I think that they've, councils always work very well when there's disasters on. My division wasn't under flood, and I spent most of my time up at the showgrounds, and I think the staff did an excellent job up there in getting bedding and food and everything. So I congratulate the staff on their disaster management.
Thank you, Chair.
All right. Shall we proceed to a vote for those four? Looking around the room, that's unanimous. The motion's carried. On to item 8 on today's agenda, the amendment to Community Christmas Carols Partnerships Agreements. Calling the relevant officer.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Mayor and Councillors. Ben Poll, General Manager, Community, Cultural and Economic Development. So this is a report concerning an amendment to a resolution regarding Community Christmas Carols, a partnership agreement. Due to the implications of COVID-19 and its impact on the likelihood of these events securing further local business sponsorship, this report seeks to potentially increase the level of support previously approved by Council. The increased support would be in the form of in-kind, such as bins, toilets, witches' hats, star picket rammers, barrier mesh cable ties, and it would not exceed a value of $4,595 for support of the Brassel Carols, and $4,178.50 for the carols at Rebel Domain, consistent with what was previously approved in the previous year. It's also worth noting that the additional support would fit within the current budget and will not necessarily be allocated unless the need can be demonstrated. We request that the report proceed to Council for endorsement.
Thank you. Any questions?
Through the chair. Ben, can I understand, so today we're talking about a couple of organisations, being the Brassel Christmas in the Park and the Carols at Rebel Domain. How many community groups do we have regarding the Christmas carols, and on what basis do we assess inclusion in the program?
There's a variety of support that's provided to community groups, and in particular the Christmas program, Christmas Across Ipswich. The aim for Council is to enable and to facilitate and support community groups to deliver community-based events. We last year supported approximately, I'm using an approximate here, approximately 20 different events across the city. Most of those were at a smaller scale because they are smaller scale community events. We've identified a handful, such as Brassel, such as Rebel, and a couple of others that we'll talk about later on during this session, that have either achieved over 4,000 attendees or have the obvious potential to achieve over 4,000 attendees. Those events we regard as being a different tier, and therefore what we'd refer to as a major community event, and therefore meet the criteria for a slightly different type of support. That support is at a higher financial level than others, but also with an aim to provide, say, a 3-year level of funding to give that event some sustainability and some certainty as to what their future looks like, but an opportunity to build some level of financial sustainability beyond just the annual request of Council, and then again annually trying to generate other sponsorships. So I hope that answers the question as to the type and nature of the support we provide.
Any further questions?
Through the Chair, Mr. Polk, so you explained before with regards to the recommendation that Council, for those two major events, provide additional in-kind support if a lack of business sponsorship due to COVID-19 impacts can be demonstrated. So my understanding from that is that local business support would be encouraged first, and if that's unavailable, then council will step in to provide in-kind support.
Exactly right. The committees of these events are working hard to achieve the result that's required, and any support that can be offered by the community or indeed the business community would be well received. If indeed they achieve that, there'll be no need for us to provide the additional in-kind.
Further questions? Mayor Harding?
Through the chair, Mr. Powell, you've mentioned the dollar amounts of what you think the in-kind support would be. I actually couldn't find it in the report or the attachment. Where would I find that?
I apologise. It should be. So in the attachment provided, which is the minutes of the previous resolution of council, it will refer on under the recommendation. Yeah, it's not as explicit as it should be. I apologise. So what we're looking at is if you look at the 2019 level of funding provided under the recommendation, that consisted of the $15,000 cash plus what was the in-kind amount. And so you'll note that the 2019 amount was actually $19,100, for the Brassel, for example, it was $19,595, 15,000 of that being cash and the other margin being the in-kind. So we've used that element, but you're right, it's not explicit within the report.
That's how you arrive at the $4,178.
That's right, because that was the previous level that was agreed, and then you'll note that in the 2020 line item it was only the cash component. We're saying we proceed with the cash component, but potentially we also provide that in-kind support that was provided in 2019 as well at the same level.
That's detailed on page 186.
Yes.
It states combined value of event sponsorship and in-kind assistance.
That's right, yes.
Through the chair. Mr. Powell, I spoke with the former Interim Administrator, Greg Chimella, about some Christmas activities, because I know, and he sort of informed me that there was a complete lack of transparency on in-kind support, and I guess for myself, certainly want to have. How will you be tracking the in-kind support to make sure that's transparent, so people know the commitment for council? Yeah.
Understood. So through our community development team and the grants support officers, they're the ones that would receive the request, and they are the ones that would then process that request and acquit that request as well. So it is managed, it's reported on, and it's...
Does it come to you for...?
It comes to me for approval.
Okay.
Right. Any further questions? Thank you, Mr. Powell.
Thank you.
Before we move it, I'd just suggest that the recommendation refers to an interim administrator, and that title no longer has significance to decision making here.
Sorry, that would be...
No, it doesn't.
That's the previous...
No.
Previous.
The minutes of the previous meeting.
That's the previous.
Yeah.
Is it being
That's the
removed?
attachment. No, that's the attachment.
Yeah.
No, I've got page 181.
That's not what my page wanted. Chair?
That's the attachment. The recommendation is on page 181.
181.
Yes.
Well, there you go. I retract wholeheartedly. Would anyone like to move that recommendation?
That's not what's in my pack.
That's not what's on screen.
Yeah.
You'd go to page 181.
Page 181.
Which page 181? Because...
You've got page 181, 733. Here's the recommendation.
Through the chair, that looks to be what was on page 186.
Oh, okay.
Bold.
That's referencing the previous recommendation of the committee. So it's what's in bold.
What's in bold?
There you go. Bit confusing though, isn't it? Both says recommendation.
Mr. Chair.
Huh?
Pick up, Mr. Chair.
The things that are in bold are the recommendations. That's the sort of code.
Yeah.
Chair, I know we haven't got a mover in a second, but I would like to somehow put in there the cap for that in-kind support that was mentioned somehow.
We could actually include that in the recommendation if need be.
Yeah, I thought before it comes to the ordinary council, if that's okay, Chair.
I wonder what happened there.
Chair, it's my understanding this recommendation is actually asking the council to provide additional in-kind support if a lack of a local business sponsorship due to COVID-19 is being demonstrated. And I just would like to have it articulated what that in-kind support is.
Yep.
That's it. And who was our mover and seconder?
Anyone like to move that?
There wasn't a mover and seconder.
I'll move.
Councillor Doyle, seconder. Councillor Milligan.
And was there some commentary that you were...
Through the chair, I have the amounts here if you'd like me to
Thank you, Mr.
talk to those. So where it refers to additional in-kind support, the second last line of the recommendation, we could put not exceeding a value of $4,595 for the support of Brassel Christmas in the park. And $4,178.50 for carols at Robel Domain.
Could I just speak to that through the chair? Why would we not just make the support in kind the same for both of them, since they're major events? Why are we stating that one's going to be less than the other? Why wouldn't we make it? They mightn't use it, but why wouldn't we make it the same for both events?
Through the chair. Happy for council to make that decision. The recommendation of the officer was just to be consistent with the previous level of funding provided in 2019. But if council would prefer to apply another amount, happy to do so.
What's up to councillors?
I just think it looks strange that we're sort of stipulating, you know, that we'll give one more than the other when they're both really major events. So I'm just saying that support in kind may be the same for both events. That's all I'm proposing.
Yeah, seems reasonable.
Through the chair, council, I'm like a round figure of 5,000 in-kind support for either.
I don't mind if we go with the 4,595
or 4,500
specific amounts, but I'm just thinking that doesn't look very fair and equitable.
All right, well, would somebody like to suggest what we finalise that figure on?
Chair, can I just check? Most of the in-kind support is your pickets and your webbing and lighting, things like that, isn't it? Isn't what a lot of the in-kind support is what council physically supplies?
That's correct. Though in saying that a portion of the cost will relate to bins and toilets.
Yeah, that's right.
Which we procure on behalf of the event.
Yep.
As per the current policy. So a proportion will be those things, and then stuff that we have in stock, such as the star pickets and fencing and those kind of items also.
Anyway, that's my proposal, that we would make it that there would be in-kind support up to not exceeding $4,595 for the support of Brassel Christmas in the park and carols at Rebel Domain.
And
Mr.
mover
Chair,
and seconder?
Each.
So
Each.
Were-
I believe that it's already been moved and seconded.
Already moved by Councillor Doyle, seconded by Councillor Milligan.
So we need to seek their concurrence.
That change.
Councillor Doyle?
Confirmed.
Councillor Milligan?
That was each. Yeah, you were right.
Each.
You need to say each. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
So we'll be voting on a
Through the chair, I think
recommendation
there's a word
including-
missing. When you say each?
For the support of each of?
Yeah, both.
Or each or both?
Russell, Christmas and
Oh.
Mark and Carol.
Through the chair, I think that still could be construed that it's
be
got to be
each.
shared.
Each of would be clearer.
Yeah.
Right.
Chair.
Is everyone happy with that proposed variation?
Confirmed.
Right, we can proceed to a vote. Those in favour? Looking around the room, it's unanimous. The motion is carried. On to item 9, major community event sponsorship, Live City Church, Redbank Plains and Tivoli Social Enterprises. Call on the relevant officer.
Thank you, Chair. So in the same theme as the previous item, this is a new request or recommendation for major event sponsorship. Originally, this report was proposed on behalf of or for both the Live City Church, supporting the Redbank Plains Community Christmas Carols, as well as Tivoli Social Enterprises for support of the Colours of Christmas Festival. Chair, we've received advice that the Live City Church Redbank Carols has made a decision not to proceed. COVID-19 has significantly impacted their planning and fundraising, and as such they've chosen to cancel the 2020 event. I ask the Chair to consider an amendment to the report, removing the references and recommendation relating to the Live City Church Redbank Carols.
Yep.
I'll move that it be removed.
Yeah, I'll second that.
Yep. There you go. Moved by Councillor Allen, seconded by Councillor Milligan to remove the sections referring to Live City Church.
Thank you.
Chair, so that means that the commitment for the 2021 is being removed, even though they haven't expressly told us that next year they won't need the funding. Does that mean that they'll just have to reapply next year?
Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Or you could leave the money in for 2021 if you wished.
Yes. For the question from myself, will we be working with the Live City Church to try to ensure that Carol's returns to Redbank Plains? There's a lot of wonderful people who live there. No.
Through the Chair, we could recommend that we commit to the 2021 funding.
You can't do it if they don't apply.
Through the Chair.
Yeah.
Also through the chair, what was the recommendation from Live City? Do they ask to have it withdrawn? What was their actual request?
At this point, I might just defer to the officer that's been working with the Live City Church. Joe?
So the cancellation ideally would only be for this year. I think that would be viewed favourably to actually have it still maintained for 2021. It would also allow all of the community carol sponsorships to be renegotiated and renewed at the one time in 2022. So I think there's some good reasoning behind that.
Okay, would any councillors propose
Councillor,
adding
okay.
that to the recommendation?
Through the Chair,
Councillor
I
Allen?
propose that that we look at their application for 2021 and offer some support to help them get it up and running, because Redbank Plains is the largest suburb in Ipswich.
Are there any further questions for the council officer regarding these matters?
No.
Your job now is to craft that into something. that
Yeah,
makes
we'll have
sense.
to.
Chair.
Ben can sit down.
So what you should say is that that we note their request to
Cancel for
to
2020.
cancel 2020, but confirm the support for 2021. So that can be A, and then B. Does that make sense?
Yep. So
that's your job to lead.
the recommendation A, would we make it A or B? Doesn't matter, does it?
No.
We need a recommendation in there that says that we confirm that Life City Church no longer requires funding for 2020, but we leave the funding on the table for them for 2021 should they proceed.
Mr Chair,
Councillor Milligan?
could I suggest that within the recommendation, the first part, that Live City Church received the following support for the Redbank Plains Community Christmas carols, there's 2 dot points, just simply remove the first dot point, 2020, and that retains dot point 2 of 2021, and leave the second part for Tivoli Social Enterprises as is.
Yep.
Yep. I'll accept that. Do we need to move it?
You just need the mover and the seconder of the original motion.
Alright.
Yeah,
To
so we've
concur?
already moved and seconded, so we'll just do it as a...
Yeah, so as long as the movers and seconders of the original motion concur, then
Which I believe they do. Yes. Councillor Ireland, are you alright with that?
Thank you, Mr Chair.
Councillor Milligan?
I suggested that, so yes.
Oh, well, you know, formality. It's very important. Shall we is there any further discussion? Alright. Shall we proceed to the vote? Those in favour? Looking around the room, that's unanimous. The motion's carried. On to item 10 on today's agenda, the community donation
May I
request.
ask for a break?
Yes.
Chair, is that okay? If
you just move.
to
Would you like to
close
move
for-
an adjournment?
May I move for an adjournment for 10 minutes?
Don't need a second.
I'll second.
Yeah, that's accepted.
Okay, and we vote?
Yeah.
We vote?
Put it to the vote. Those in favour? It's unanimous.
Thank you.
So we come back at, is it 10 minutes?
live stream, man? We're live. Councillor Kunzelin? Zero. So we're up to item 10 on the agenda, community donation request. So just call on the relevant council officer.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. Ben Pole, General Manager, Community, Cultural and Economic Development. This report relates to community donation requests received for the most recent period. There are 4 requests from the Christian Reformed Church of Tivoli, from Waicare, South East Queensland, from the Ipswich State High School PNC, and from the Queensland Pioneer Steam Railway. These applications have met standard policy and procedure and been assessed independently by council officers. The applications are recommended for approval by council officers, and we request that the report proceed to council for endorsement.
Right. Are there any questions?
Sorry, thank you, Mr. Chair. Through the Chair. What was the budget for this financial year for community donation, or the community grant program?
The
400?
total budget, sorry, I'll just defer to the relevant officer.
400,000.
400,000, right, that's
How are we
right.
tracking with that? Are we within budget or not?
We are within budget. In the financial year to date, not including these ones that are on the table here today, but the financial year to date we've received and approved, 55 submissions totalling $247,000. Currently, as I say, not including these ones that are on the table today, $149,350 remain in the community donations budget. If these are to be approved, we will have $89,000 unspent in that community donations budget.
Thank you, Mr. Powell.
Any further questions? No. Thank you, Mr. Pole. Would anybody like to move these recommendations?
I'll move.
Councillor Fackner. Is there a seconder? Councillor Milligan. Any discussion? All right, well, we'll put the matter to the vote. Those 4? Around the room, that's unanimous. The motion's carried. Item 11 on our agenda, the community donations report.
Thank you, Chair. The recommendation is for the report to be received and the contents noted. Discretionary funds, the report and its recommendations are consistent with local government regulations. Discretionary funds allocated are required to be publicly reported under section 202A of the Local Government Regulation 2012. Applications for funding through the Community Donations Program are assessed in accordance with the eligibility criteria and assessment process outlined in the Community Funding and Support Policy and associated administrative guidelines. This report provides detail about the allocation of community donations for the 19-20 financial year up to 31 May 2020 as per attachment 1, and provides a summary of these community donations by recipient type as per attachment 2.
Are there any questions, councillors? Thank you, Mr. Powell.
Thank you.
Would anybody like to move the acceptance of this report? Councillor Doyle. Seconders. Councillor Ireland. As seconded, we'll put it. Any discussion? Put this to a vote. Those 4. Looking around the room, it's unanimous. The motion is carried. Up next is the item number 12, update of ICT open data policy. I call on the relevant officer to lead the discussion on this one.
Morning, Chair and Councillors.
G'day.
So the open data policy was required to be reviewed as per council motion. It had only been reviewed in February, and we've taken this opportunity to do that piece of work again. You'll notice from the track change version that in aligning to contemporary practice, quite a few changes have been made to align it to Queensland and Australian best practice. There are really no substantive elements that I would bring forward, but as part of the broader piece of work for, pardon me, I just ran the Data and Transparency Hub, this is a critical component of that work to ensure that our intent as council going forward is around the push data model rather than what it has been in the past.
Great. Are there any questions? Oops, no?
I should ask one through the chair. Obviously, open data is a passion project, and thank you, CIO, for all your work in here. And obviously during the briefings, to me, it's about, I guess, what are you doing to make sure the International Open Data Charter talks about the number one principle being open by default. How do you see that working with this policy and through the organisation?
Through the alignment of new work that's being done, which is the creation of a data classification standard, and that piece has been done, and that clearly defines the open by default model that is the tenet of push data. It's a fairly big departure for council. It's going to require a lot of change to underlying processes in order for us to create an information asset register for council. So there are incremental steps that will layer up this work, and I would suggest that this is going to be an iterative approach, because some of these things we're not going to discover until we're in the midst of it. But it's a tremendous opportunity, and it will go, it's not something that you do once, which is why in all of the reviews of these things we're saying it's 6 months before we'll need to do this again. And that's when we'll start getting an appreciation for the level of process change that's going to be required across council to shift that model. All of our things like our information disclosure models, our scripting, all of those fundamental and quite granular things will need to be updated in order for us to fit within our new classification schema. And a lot of work is being done in the formation of an information governance framework, which the standard will sit into. There are nesting policies, procedures and directives that will flow out of that. So we were very mindful of getting the most important components in place in order for us to go live 1 July with the hub, and this was one of those components.
Thank you. So through the chair, just one other question. What kind of emphasis will we be putting on data being machine readable? So rather than just PDFs that are scanned in, but actual files that are CSV, text and HTML files. So it is easily to be reused.
Yes, the reuse is a vital component of the open data policy. It does need to be machine readable, and the hub is, the premise of hub is that everything put up is using CCAN as the model for reusability and to make it consumable and usable by the public and by council for other, in other ways that we will use that information, and treat the accumulation of our data as an asset that has value, that is itemised and treated with appropriate governance instruments. So there's an exciting opportunity there.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you.
Any further? Councillor Johnny?
The Chair. Hi, Sylvia. So when you're talking about push data, are you talking about changing our system so that everything is automatically pulled into the hub as opposed to connecting it and having to manually?
That's the end state that we would like to see, where we can introduce APIs and other much more ingrained ability for council to ingest data to the hub and whatever other portals use those informations. But at the moment, we have some constraints and limitations in that space, so we are highly reliant on CSVs and Excel spreadsheets and things like that, which is not optimal, because every time you touch it, it actually devalues the asset the information asset. So, yes, that is our end state.
Yeah.
We do have quite a bit of a ways to go, but with that goal in mind, that's what will be forefront of our thinking as we make decisions around systems, platforms, and that sort of thing going forward.
So for it to roll out 1 July, that model that will be there will be mostly exporting like your CSVs from all the different programs and importing them into the hub.
Yeah, so an integral part of the development of the hub structure is that we identified the process for data export so that we could automate that and schedule it and have those uploads done with as few touches as possible. But that, again, that's a work in progress. Some of these things have come from multiple sites, and then I would suggest, though, that that's mostly the historical data that we have those sorts of issues with. Most of what we go forward with is from our primary systems, and that is a simple scheduled update, upload of information.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Sylvia.
Thanks.
Would anyone like to move the recommendation? Councillor Doyle, seconder. Councillor Mayor Harding. Any discussion? All right. Well, we'll proceed to a vote. Those for? Around the room. It's unanimous. The motion's carried. Moving on to item number 13. The recommended repeal of council policies on operational employee matters. I call on the relevant officer.
Good morning, Sonia Cooper, General Manager of Corporate Services. So you have before you a report in relation to the recommended repeal of council policies on a range of operational employee matters. As the report indicates, there's a resolution that is being sought to repeal 9 council policies on operational employee matters. This set of recommendations is coming forward in line with the Council Policy and Procedure Framework that was a product of Business Transformation Project number 9. So after a range of work undertaken by the team working on the transformation project and by the People and Culture branch within the Corporate Services Department, they have reviewed these policies and are recommending them for alternate treatment, given they are operational employee matters that are best managed in line with the framework by the Chief Executive Officer, rather than needing to be matters that are not of a strategic nature requiring council consideration. So for each of the for each of the policies, we've got a proposed replacement action or coverage set out in the report for council's consideration. Thank you.
All right. Are there any questions? Thank you, Sonia.
Thank you.
Would anyone like to move this? Mayor Harding, second. Councillor Milligan. Any discussion? Mayor Harding.
Chair, I just want to commend the organisation for this report, and it's an important part of the business transformation program. Councillors should not be influencing the day-to-day operations. That is up to the CEO, so I do commend this report and support it wholeheartedly.
Right, any further discussion? Put the matter to a vote. Those for? Around the room, it's unanimous. Well, the motion's carried. Moving on to item number 14, the tender consideration plan for the procurement of creative services.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. Ben Pole, General Manager, Community, Cultural and Economic Development. This item is a quote or tender consideration plan for the procurement of creative services. Procurement of creative services often presents a complex procurement situation where it's not possible to obtain 3 written quotes, nor is it advantageous to call for tenders, as required under the Ipswich City Council Procurement Code of Practice. For such situations, the Local Government Regulation 2012, Section 230, allows a local government to enter into a medium or large contractual agreements without first inviting written quotes or tenders through the preparation and adoption of a quote or tender consideration plan. The attached quote or tender consideration plan, Procurement of Creative Services, provides the information required to comply with the regulation and to justify the use of the plan as an effective and appropriate alternative to seeking quotes or calling for open tenders. The plan has been developed in consultation with Council's Manager Procurement, and the plan includes examples of the types of unique creative services with which we might be dealing. Following some discussions last week where this council considered a range of tender consideration plans, if council is to proceed with this report and the recommendation, I would recommend through the chair some amendments to the recommendations to be consistent with the approach that's now been taken as it was defined last week. If you'd like me to, I could outline what the changes to the recommendations might be.
Please do.
So currently we have one recommendation, and that is for council to resolve to adopt the tender consideration plan. As I say, consistent with the discussions of last week, the recommendations would change to being A, B and C. Recommendation A being that council resolve to prepare a tender consideration plan for procurement of creative services in accordance with Section 230(1)(a) of the Local Government Regulation 2012. And I can provide that detail to the author editing the report. We could just wait for that. Council resolve to prepare tender consideration plan. Of the Local Government Regulation 2012. Excellent, thank you. That recommendation B is indeed the current recommendation of the report. That council resolve to adopt a quote or tender consideration plan for procurement of creative services. Thank you. And that recommendation C, again consistent with the tender consideration plans of last week, that the Chief Executive Officer be authorised to negotiate and finalise the terms of any contracts prepared. Negotiate and finalise the terms of any contracts prepared in line with this tender consideration plan for procurement of creative services to be executed by council and to do any other acts necessary to implement council's decision in accordance with Section 13(3) brackets 3 of the Local Government Act 2009. Through the Chair, I apologise for making those amendments on the floor and without notice. But as I say, we took the lead from the discussions of last week and thought this was the appropriate way to rectify the report that was previously presented.
Are there any questions for Mr. Powell? Mayor Harding?
Through the Chair, Mr. Powell, page 244, which is an attachment 1. On the bottom there, number 4. I'll let you Let me know when you're there.
Page 244.
44. And there's point 4. Any alternative ways of achieving the objectives and why the alternative ways were not adopted.
Yes.
There's a sentence there at the end of that first paragraph that says that this has, talks about the alternative would be to contract out entire events to event management entities to deliver. Following the former Ipswich Event Corporation model, these entities would have greater flexibility to engage creative services. This has not been deemed an option as Council has recently bought event management services to Council as the past model was not in the best interests of the Council. I've taken time to review the audited annual reports of the Ipswich Events Corporation for the last few years. May I ask what evidence there is around that last statement?
Certainly. Utilisation of Ipswich Events Corporation, which was procured through a tender process.
Yeah.
Those tender processes, in my experience, my recent experience in coming to Council, of course, Ipswich Events Corporation have been around for many, many years. My experience was that the practical competitive tendering for that piece of work, I think the best word to describe was minimal. There was minimal competitive tendering for that piece of work. Also, the ability for Ipswich...
Or for the Ipswich Events Corporation, sorry? Or for the work that they did?
For the work that they did. So the tender that Council would put to the market, the response that we would get from the market was extremely limited. And in my opinion, meant that there was a lack of, I suppose, competitive opportunity for Council to really stress test the delivery of what Council was seeking. There was also, in my opinion, a change in direction of this Council, seeking for a broader approach to events. I suppose the previous mandate of the Ipswich Events Corporation was focused on Ipswich Central and delivery of activation and events within Ipswich Central. And as I say, the organisation, it's my belief and my understanding, and based on my experience, was that the organisation was seeking a broader brief. In consultation with Ipswich Events Corporation, that was not necessarily what they were seeking to do as an organisation, which meant that their ability to potentially deliver on the requirements of Ipswich City Council under their current construct and the future requirements of Council was limited. That, in addition to the fact that history showed there was a lack of competitive tendering, leads us to say that model was not effective for Council.
Thank you. And through the chair, I notice in the I think the second paragraph of the executive summary, it states the procurement of creative services often presents complex procurement situations where it's not possible to obtain 3 written quotes, nor is it advantageous to call for tenders as required under the Ipswich City Council Procurement Code of Practice. That kind of sounds like to me that this proposal that's coming to us is it's a TCP asking us to do the very thing that the Ipswich Events Corporation were doing, which you're saying there was a lack of responses or lack of competitive, what was the word that you used? Lack of competitive...
Tendering.
Tendering. But this TCP is actually asking us to allow us to do that in-house as well. How...
The Chair, is it not asking for us to have the opportunity to go to a big act and say we wish to use you, and that obviously there's only one Stevie Nicks, and if we wanted her, that wouldn't be appropriate.
So that's probably a discussion, if I could finish the question, if that's okay, Chair. My question is that the reason that you said that we're not using Ipswich Events Corporation is because of lack of competitive tendering. But this TCP is coming to us, telling us that there's going to be a lack of competitive tendering, which I agree is the marketplace. I guess I'm asking what's that was the same thing.
Through the chair, I apologise, I may have miscommunicated. The lack of competitive tendering that I was referring to was the tender that Council was putting to the market for the services which Ipswich Events Corporation tendered for. So when we were saying we were looking for an event management organisation to deliver on a portfolio of event and activation, the responses we were getting from the market were extremely limited, to the point where it was viewed that it was not actually a competitive tender because there were so few people in the market that were able to respond that the only response was coming from Ipswich Events Corporation. The point you're making, which is correct, that this does now remove our activity when it comes to procuring events, performers. No issue in the way that was undertaken by the previous Ipswich Events Corporation. We're undertaking through this mechanism a similar approach. I'd hasten to add though that our approach is very much governed by local government regulations and principles and the procurement policies and procedures of council. The former Ipswich Events Corporation was not bound by those regulations or policies.
Okay. And through the chair, you talked about the fact that the Ipswich Events Corporation was more as a perception of Ipswich Central. Were they given an opportunity or a remit to broaden, to do an Ipswich citywide program? Do you know?
I'd suggest not in the shape of a formal tender, but through the consultation with the former Ipswich Events Corporation and their board, discussing that this was now the objectives of council. It was through, I suppose, that discussion with the board that there was an indication that that was not really what they were equipped for, or what they were seeking to evolve their organisation as going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts.
Any further questions? Thank you, Mr. Bowles.
Thank you.
Would anyone like to move the amended recommendations on the screen? I'll move. Councillor Fackner, any seconder? Councillor Kunzelman. Any discussion?
Yes, through the chair. I think that it's an exciting opportunity for us to put on some really great events for the city, taking it in-house. We're in really great hands. We have a wonderful councillor officer in Joe heading up the way that Ipswich City puts on events moving forward. And last week we had a brief on some of the wonderful events that were to take place this year, but aren't able to because of COVID-19. And I think that our faith is well placed in putting on events internally moving forward. I certainly am very keen to see the creative direction of 2021 and how we roll it out. So just keeping an eye on the success of these events and the direction that it goes in. I think that keeping it in-house but allowing the creative processes to take place is really important for us. This is very key to our success in putting on events. If we want to attract big people to come to the city, and we have a very specific creative vision for very specific events that we want to put on, this piece of work in our endorsement is very important for us to be able to put on very good events for the city moving forward. So, this has my full support, and I look forward to some of the exciting acts that could potentially be visiting Ipswich in the future.
Councillor Johnny?
Through the chair, I just wanted to take this opportunity to praise Jo and her team. We've seen the full lineup of the events that have mostly been postponed into 2021 due to COVID-19, and in my opinion, they would have been really successful in raising the profile of our city as a leading events destination. Then to highlight your skills once more for the swift adaptation during the pandemic to move festivals online with your Festival of Four Walls. So I haven't had the opportunity to thank you and your team yet, but I was very engaged in your briefing session last week, and I was very excited with all the festivals to come. So thank you for all your dedication and hard work.
Through the chair, I acknowledge that it wouldn't be easy coming into a workplace of bureaucracy when you are a creative individual, and you want to get moving, and you want to see exciting things to happen. But it is my hope that this empowers, Ipswich events to be able to have the creative freedoms that you need to put on a successful event and attract awesome people to the city.
Through the chair, just to open up that discussion on how important the creative industries and creative community are in Ipswich. I don't know if people have heard anything from the arts or the creative communities on what they'd like to see. Just open that up to any discussion.
Through the chair, yeah, just to open that discussion up. I think through my channels and what I've been hearing a lot from the community is they just want to see something different, something fresh and exciting, something that's targeted at a younger market as well. We are a city with a very young population, so we want something interesting and exciting for people in their 20s and early 30s to be able to attend is what I'm hearing, and but not also forgetting that there are young families here as well. But yeah, I think that there's a huge gap in events in Ipswich that doesn't cater for young people, and previously hasn't been engaging, and a lot of what I've been hearing is that we look forward to putting on events that are tailored towards young people, live entertainment, and events that complement local businesses as well. So there's a huge economic benefit to putting on events if you do it correctly. And I guess as a part of growing up and employing someone who's quite a professional in the space and working with them is to identify how you best incorporate that in the community. So I know that the rollout of the events next year will include more of that targeted to a younger demographic. So I look forward to that, and what I've been hearing in the community is that there's a huge calling for something like that to be complementary and inclusive of all ages, rather than forgetting about particular age demographics.
Through the chair, I concur with Councillor Fechner, and it's also important to highlight that it's a great opportunity for both young and old local performers. We have many talented members of the arts community in Ipswich, and they are very, very keen to put their skills on display to the people of Ipswich. So, with the development of our CBD and our civic spaces, there's great opportunities there for, live dramatic performances, music. So, looking forward to that.
Excellent.
Through the chair, as part of the discussion, one of my election commitments was the Ipswich Creative Initiative, and work is underway now to do expressions of interest, to bring together people from the full spectrum of the creative and arts community to work on a special calendar on this, and for them to be consulted as part of this process. And I think we're meeting this afternoon, Mr. Poll, to have further discussions on that, to make sure that all parts of the community are consulted.
Very good. Any further discussion? No. All right, we'll put the matter to a vote. Those for? Looking around the room, that's unanimous, so the motion's carried. Moving on to item 15 on today's agenda, the proposed Ipswich adopted infrastructure charges, resolution number 1. Relevant council officers coming forth to lead the discussion, as always.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Peter Tabulo, General Manager of Planning and Regulatory Services. Councillors, before you this morning is a report that will be presented to you once a year through the term of this council, whereby we seek approval to increase the development charges that we apply with our applications by an index, and in this case it's the producer price index, which is basically an index that looks at the cost of construction across the region, and that currently is running at a tick over 3%. So this resolution seeks to pass that increase across the range of infrastructure charges that we apply, be they for traffic, be they for water and sewage on behalf of urban utilities, or community and open space. Bearing in mind that the state has set a maximum regulated charge of just over $29,000 for a parcel of land. That is the cap on charges. So while the infrastructure charge may vary across the city depending on its locality and the components that I just mentioned, the maximum charge that we can only include is about $29,000, just over $29,000. So this is a very procedural report. Apologies for the large volume of attachments that accompanied it, but it was just for completeness of information and showing you the documentation that goes behind the scenes for such a resolution.
Any questions? Mayor Harding?
What is the PPI, the producer price index for this year?
It's about 3.03%, I think the figure was in the report. So it's an index that's determined by looking at the cost of construction across a range of elements.
Okay. And just to check, this is a report that we will receive once a year?
Correct.
Thank you, Peter. Would anybody like to move the adoption? Mayor Harding, second. Councillor Fechner. Any discussion? We'll proceed to a vote. Those in favour?
Excuse me.
Around the room. It's unanimous. The motion's carried. Moving on to item number 16. For today, we have the rates timetable for 2020-2021. Calling on the relevant officer to lead the discussion.
Good morning, Mayor and Councillors. Jeff Keach, Manager of Finance. Through the Chair, this report outlines for Council and for the community the suggested issuance dates and the discount and due date for payments on a quarterly basis for the rates for the 2020 and 21 year. The table included in there outlines the specific dates that we're suggesting there that allows time for both postage and 30-day payment terms in accordance with the Act. Councillors will note that one of the periods in the first quarter is obviously reduced down the date between the due dates for payments and discount dates between the date that Council has recently extended as a result of COVID-19 for the April to June quarter, which was due last week on the 18th of June, to what is the proposed date on the 13th of August, meaning that that period is only the 8-week period, not the normal 13 weeks that we would grant there. I think the rest of it's there. I'm happy to take any questions or comments if there's anything else in relation to the report.
Councillor Tully.
Yes, the issue I raised when we discussed this informally last week is that perhaps with that first column or tabulation that we should asterisk that to show what the period was between the original due date, which would have been, I assume, 12 or 13 weeks. I think for the sake of completeness, can that be added to the report, please? Yeah. And we talked about asterisking that and
little note below
and showing that what the number of weeks was between that and the original date. That no one was penalised. They actually benefited. Yes,
they benefit. Yeah. Through the Chair, when I have checked on our website. When we publish that on our website, we actually don't publish the number of weeks. We can, if Council would like to. Normally, it's just the first 3 columns that we've published in the past. Not that fourth column. So even if we do publish those normal 3, I think it is appropriate to put an asterisk down there and some reference to the point that the Council had previously extended the last discount date and that there was a reduced period this time around. So happy to include that.
We can change the table as that's part of the recommendation. So we can
change. You just need to shape it the right way.
Yep, that's what I'm suggesting.
So we can, instead of an asterisk, we can change it to 12 weeks within the table. That's the advice.
Through the Chair, we've really had 2 due dates.
Yeah.
And therein lies the dilemma. But I think for the sake of completeness and that this is a public document, that we should indicate what the period of time was, even if it is asterisked from the original due date.
Correct. Maybe we just put a line down below them and say the previous due date, the period between the original discount date and the revised discount date being the 18th of June was 13 weeks as normal.
Yes, thank you.
Weeks.
Yep.
Jeff, can you just confirm, and can the meeting confirm, Councillor Tully, that you're happy with the wording? Because this will be the recommendation. So.
Yep.
The previous between the original...
for the April to June.
Probably not the reference to the revised discount date, just previous time or period between the original due date and the...
extended. Yeah.
No, not the extended. No, we're talking about...
Revised. Oh, yes.
Between the two.
Chair, would you say that the discount period is reduced by 5 weeks because we extended the discount due date or something like that?
I think there needs to be an inclusion of the chair of the reference to 13 or 14 weeks so that there's no penalty.
Yes.
Correct.
And no, I think by bringing in the revised discount date is going to confuse that. The previous period between the original due date and the due date, first due date in 2021 was 13 or 14 weeks. Yeah. If it was 13.
13 weeks, it was 13 weeks, yeah.
Right.
I think that...
Happy with that wording?
Previous period between the original and the first due date in 20...
No, we won't be able to say for the verse. Yes.
Yeah, I think that's right.
That's correct, yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm happy with that.
All right. Would you like to move that amendment?
Yeah, I'll formally move that.
Oh, is it very... Yeah.
No, it's a motion. It hasn't been moved by
Yeah. Hasn't been moved yet.
Well, I move the adoption of the report with that with that inclusion.
Councillor Ireland seconds. Are there any further questions? Thank you, Jeff. Any discussion?
Through the chair, we changed 20-21 to 2020 dash. Yeah.
Yep.
Does the mover accept?
More than happy with that.
Seconder?
Yes, thank you.
Any discussion?
Just a note, Chair, that table is also replicated in the report, so made to make sure we copy that asterisk and over to the next page.
Into the report. Okay. We shall proceed to a vote. Those in favour of adopting. Recommendations, that's unanimous. The motion's carried. Moving on to item 17, the monthly finance performance report for April 2020. Call on the relevant officer.
Good morning again. This report is the normal monthly report that comes up to Council in relation to Council's financial performance. Mayor and Councillors, and through the Chair, you'll note that item 18 is actually the month of May, so I'm happy to sort of just only highlight a couple of key points from April and probably talk a little bit more detail into the next one if you would prefer, or I'm happy to go through any level of questions. There's a couple of key points to highlight in relation to April's performance. You'll note one of the major ones is that fees and charges was down approximately about $1 million in the month. 250 of that was as a result of us, the Council's decision to waive and refund fees in relation to its response to COVID to support the community, and the other was just general reduction in that period of time. How much of that related to COVID is very difficult to determine, but one would anticipate that some of that, there were certainly things like reduction in some of our parking fees, etc., as Council had decided not to charge parking in the CBD, etc., from those areas. And the other area is the developer contributions in the month that comes in to help fund our infrastructure. That was below budget by $2 million in the month of April. And again, what relationship that has to COVID is very difficult to determine, but it certainly dropped off heavily in that period of time. So overall at April, we were tracking a little bit below budget, and that was primarily because of an assessment in relation to how we dealt with the write-off of assets, which is about $2.6 million in there. If you exclude that, which is what we've done in the May period, we actually end up slightly in front of budget as at April. But happy to take any questions as from through the Chair.
Any questions? Thank you, Jeff. Would anybody like to move the acceptance of this report? Councillor Johnnick. Seconder. Mayor Harding. A discussion. We'll put it to a vote. Those in favour of accepting the report? Unanimous. The motion's carried. Moving on to item 18, the monthly finance performance report for May 2020. On the relevant officer.
Thank you, Chair. The May report, as you have in front of you, outlines again the performance up to the year-to-date period to May. Again, just to highlight a couple of points for the Council's attention. In the May period, we received $4 million federal assistance grant. which was budgeted for in June. So that's one of the major reasons why when you look at the overall result, we're actually in front of budget. If you excluded that as a timing difference, we end up very close, sort of about $700,000 more favourable to budget on a year-to-date basis, and that will obviously come out in the June period. Again, just to highlight a couple of points that it's noted in the report, we still continue to notice a little bit of the impacts of reduced growth that we saw during the year in our rates and utility charges, being down a couple $100,000, but really minor percent overall. Again, we saw a reduction in fees and charges, not as substantial as what there was in the April period, about 12% or $300,000 in total. But again, if that continued on a yearly basis, that would be quite material over a 12-month period. So year to date there, we're now actually $1.9 million below budget, and $1 million of that relates to town planning and regulatory fees. And we've also seen, as mentioned there, a drop-off in the waste services, one because of the waste levy on skip services, but again, some drop-off in commercial aspects as a result of COVID. The other area, again, to highlight, again, just to come back to the point on developer contributions, again, we saw a drop-off at this time about $1.4 million below budget. So now year to date, we're actually $6.7 million below in terms of cash received from developers to assist in funding infrastructure. So that's quite material as a whole. What we are seeing, of course, is a level of underspend and so some of that revenue has been offset by just general underspend in materials and services, where we're about $4 million favourable. Some of that, again, is a result of services that have been delayed, things like we spoke before, a couple of items below about the deferral of events, for example, and what would have been planned in this last quarter hasn't been able to be delivered, and therefore we've seen some of the reduced expenditure in materials and services, which is offsetting some of that revenue reduction. Again, this time we've actually now adjusted for, as I mentioned in the previous comment, that the write-off of assets, we've worked in how that aligns with the QAO's measure of that, and that's been treated as capital expenditure versus offsetting the operating, and so you've seen that change in the reporting. But again, happy to take any questions through the chair in relation to that report.
Question? Thank you, Jeff. Thank you. Would anybody like to move the acceptance of this report? Councillor Milligan, second. Councillor Johnnick. Any discussion? No.
Probably something I'd like to discuss with the CEO, if that's okay, Chair. CEO, just obviously coming to the end of the financial year now, what are the sort of the bigger picture items that you think that the council should be made aware of?
Well, the underlying issue is it's very tight. It's actually, I guess, pleasing that we're being able to maintain our operating position, but obviously the significant issue in the absolute short term is the fall off in cash developer contributions, which assists in funding our capital program, and in particular a number of very significant growth-related road projects that we have coming forward, and we'll discuss as part of the budget. Another significant issue that comes off those developer contributions is the level of growth this organisation is geared for and has established certain infrastructure requirements and some cost bases that are relating to us continue to grow at quite a significant rate. We are Queensland's fastest growing city and one of the fastest growing local authorities in Australia. And so if the rate of population growth and residential property growth slows down, then we'll be under some pressure going forward.
Thank you.
I'll ask one more thing, that's okay. CEO, through the chair. Just know that next financial year we'll be taking on, I guess, the biggest debt for the CBD redevelopment, and going into a new financial year with COVID. Do you have any advice for the councillors? How we manage that?
Advice, interesting question. Obviously, yes, this council has embarked on a significant investment in new assets, following a very strategic path that looks to reinvigorate the Ipswich CBD and also allows the Westmoreton Health service to expand on the site that we're on currently, and guarantees not just Ipswich Central but the Ipswich City as the core part of the health services for Western Brisbane. And but that does put some pressure on this council going forward with quite a significant debt, which, as I said, again links to the growth model. That debt becomes less significant as the population grows, but if we have the population plateaus for a period of time, that will place some pressure on us. So obviously we have to be very careful in terms of financial management going forward. We need to be careful about what we're spending. We need to make sure that we maximise our income going forward.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
We've got movers and seconders, all right. Shall proceed to the vote. Those in favour of accepting the report? It's unanimous. The motion is carried. We move on to item 19, the Queensland Audit Office 2020 Interim Audit Report. All the relevant officer.
Sonia Cooper, General Manager, Corporate Services. Through the Chair, this is a report concerning the Queensland Audit Office observations and recommendations from the 2020 Interim Audit of Ipswich City Council. The Auditor-General has written to the Mayor providing a copy of the 2020 Interim Audit Report, which comprises a summary of the issues formally reported to management relating to internal controls, a summary of significant deficiencies, control deficiencies, financial reporting and other matters for attention. The recommendation is that the report concerning the QAO 2020 Interim Audit Report, detailed in Attachment 1 of the report by the Principal Financial Accountant, dated 25 May 2020, be received and noted. QAO will return later in the year in August to undertake their final audit report. However, as the report notes, this report focuses predominantly on the internal controls. As can be seen from the report, they assess the design and implementation of our internal controls for revenue, expenditure and payroll, and whether they're operating effectively. The report notes that 2 new deficiencies and 1 other new matter are raised, and states that this is a notable improvement from previous years. The report also noted that Council has continued to improve its overall control environment and that the appropriateness of its systems and processes and has made significant progress in addressing previous audit issues. However, the report does detail and re-raise 3 significant deficiencies relating to our SAP HR payroll system that have been raised in past years. As detailed in the report, Council's management team has considered and agreed with the QAO recommendations, and we've set out responses in the report, including our corrective plan of action to comply with QAO's recommendations. And this draft report, a draft of this report was presented by the Queensland Audit Office at the Audit and Risk Management Committee meeting held on the 20th of May 2020. So to reiterate that while we're pleased that we have been able to make progress and improvement, there are still further actions that we need to finalise in order to address in full the recommendations, certainly the re-raised recommendations. Significant work has already been completed, but not sufficient for QAO to close those recommendations. And we have a plan, as mentioned, to address the new matters raised.
Right. Any questions? Thank you, Sonia.
Thank you.
Anybody like to move the acceptance of this report? Councillor Doyle. Seconded by Councillor Fechner. Any discussion? Mayor Harding.
CEO, note that in our briefings on this matter beforehand, we discussed the three significant deficiencies, and it's my understanding from that they're all going to be addressed by the 30th of June. Might I just check?
Ms Cooper is nodding with confidence. It's only a week.
I'm just, as part of the discussion, just asking if that's what's happening and...
It's, my understanding is that is in train, and if it hasn't already been done, it's about to be resolved.
I guess we've got our next ordinary, through the chair, we've got our next ordinary meeting on the 30th. Will we be able to report on that, do you think? Through the chair. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair.
All right. We will proceed to the vote. Those for accepting the report. And the room. So unanimous. The motion is carried. We'll move on to item number 20, the repeal of previous council decision for proposed new telecommunications lease for Optus Mobile. Call on the relevant officer to lead the discussion.
Good morning. Brett McGrath, Property Services Manager. So this is a report just to repeal the previous council decision. The resolution in that report was very specific in regards to when the lease had to commence from 1 July 2019. Negotiations haven't progressed as we expected, but now we've got a negotiated position with Optus, and we just propose to fix up that recommendation and adopt the new report so that we can finalise the lease with Optus.
Are there any questions?
Yes.
Through the chair, Mr. Brown, my read of this is the fact that there's no financial impact, this repeal and the new recommendation, and really it was going to be an 8-year lease from the 1st of July 2019, but now it's a 7-year lease from 1st of July 2020. Would that be correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Brad.
Thank you.
Would any councillor like to move the acceptance of these recommendations? Councillor Fackner, seconder. Councillor Doyle. Any discussion? I will put that to a vote. Those in favour of accepting the recommendations? Around the room, it's unanimous. Motion's carried. We move on to item 21 on the agenda, the update on library services strategy and policy. Call on the relevant officer to lead.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. Ben Pohl, General Manager, Community, Cultural and Economic Development. This item is an update on library services strategy and policy. At the council meeting of 26 May 2020, a supplementary motion was moved by Councillor Ireland that a report outlining current strategies and policies for libraries, including the future deployment of library pods, be presented to a future meeting, as well as the usage and costing of the Carolee Library Pod. Councillor Milligan added a variation to that report, be presented at the next council meeting, that being the July ordinary council meeting. The report provided documents, as requested, the current strategies and policies for libraries. Also, it reports on the usage and costs of the Carolee Library Pod. It's fair to say that whilst the library strategy, the Ipswich Library Strategy 2019-2024 may not have been formally adopted on its completion in March 2019, the council library services have not been rudderless or failing. Active library memberships have increased 12%, or 4,561 users in 2019. The Carolee Library Pod was deployed, the Council Connect mobile hub was implemented, and detailed planning for the Rosewood and Ipswich Central Libraries has been prioritised. In addition to a restructure and merging of customer service functions, followed by a systems and business processes review with national benchmarking. In my opinion, this puts Council in a strong and well-evidenced position to discuss and design our preferred future for libraries and customer services. Allowing for the finalisation of the review and the opening of the 2 new libraries in the next few months, this is potentially a key strategic vision for development by this new council. The recommendation of the report is for it to be received and the contents noted.
Right. Any questions?
Through the chair, So the figures that you've given us for the Carolee pod took out the 6.5 weeks or included the 6.5 weeks of COVID while the Redbank Plains Library was closed, or all the libraries were closed?
It's simply a report on the time that the pod has been open.
So it's not really fair to count in that 6.5 weeks because there's nothing else open. People had to go there if they wanted to borrow library books.
Yep.
So I don't think that's comparing apples with apples.
I'm not sure we're comparing. We're simply providing the data of the usage of the pod over a period without filtering or...
I know, but I think that you've got to take into consideration libraries were closed. So,
Absolutely.
you know, people from Tivoli, Carolee, you know, wherever, Brassel even, came to borrow books. So I don't think it's fair to say that was the general use of that pod over the time it's been opened.
But we'll continue to report on that data for you, and you'll get a more, I suppose, comparative view now that the restrictions are easing.
And I have raised, through the chair again, I have raised with you my concerns that we would put a pod out at Ripley. It's a high growth area, it's a state development area. The Education Department realises that there's going to be young families out there, they're building schools. I don't think a pod will adequately service that Ripley catchment going forward, and I think that we haven't asked the users at Carolee, how did they find it? Was it up to their expectations? We're just saying, yes, it was used, and it was, I live at Carolee, it was great. But I just think that for a brand new area that's expecting, you know, planning and development must have some idea of lots going forward, how many can go out there. I just think that we need to put not a pod out there. I think that for the young children, because in the pod it's very limited what children can borrow. I think that we need to have something more usable for the children, and whether or not the new developments out there will all have good broadband, because we have one new high school currently, whether or not the usage for everybody of the computers will be necessary for that community. So they're my concerns going forward in putting a pod out at Ripley. Thank you.
Any further questions? Right, thank you, Mr. Powell. Would anybody like to move the acceptance of the report?
Discussion? Got to move it first.
Got to move it first, mate?
You have a mover and a second.
Would you like to move it?
I'll move it.
Councillor Ireland, seconder. Need to discussion. Would anybody like to?
I just had a comment about the library usage during COVID. When it was announced that the libraries were closed, we were all invited to go and select 50 items and return them at the end of June. I'm just saying that 50 items is a heck of a lot. And I didn't see any interruption to my reading schedule whatsoever.
Noted. Any further discussion?
Through the chair, I think the Carolee pod is an Australian first, or is it it's pretty innovative, and it's a really impressive facility out there at Carolee as well. So just a discussion point.
I guess my thoughts as somebody who lives in Ripley myself, when you see the projections for 130,000 people to live there in 2036, I think we need to ensure that in 2036 there's more than a pod. And that's worth noting, because 130,000 people will need more than that, and it's interesting technology, but at the same time, a pod doesn't give you the same offerings of a traditional library. So we have to remain committed to the community space and programming that a traditional library can offer, in my views.
Mr. Chair, I believe the Carolee pod is a fantastic asset for council to provide service delivery to the community. I've hung around at the Carolee pod a bit and discussed with members of the community as they're utilising it, and it is very favourable. I think in terms of looking forward to other library sites. As an organisation delivering services to the community, we could do things in a staged approach. We acknowledge that the growth in the regional area will occur, but in the meantime, the report states the cost of the implementation of this being the first pod. When you compare that figure to what a full library would cost as a staged approach, I believe it would be useful for residents of the area. But I think the report that has been provided by council officers with regards to this request fully answers the questions that were asked initially.
Any further?
Well, through the chair, I think that if you look in our most recent history, how many libraries we're actually building and how much of the ratepayers' money we've committed to libraries very recently, I would be keen to know what the wider community thinks about rushing into building yet another library. I would like to just monitor, I guess, the use of the new Rosewood Library and the new CBD Library and the Children's Library down there, and to see where the active users are coming from. So, I just want to make comment that we have spent a lot on libraries in recent years, and two yet to open. I mean, we look forward to those. And I would just be keen to see what the usage is and where and from which suburbs are servicing which libraries.
Yes. Yeah, I concur. I don't believe that we need to turn sod on a Ripley Library tomorrow. The need isn't there quite yet, but as we know from previous experiences, that sometimes it takes a few decades of lobbying to get a library built, so I'm just getting in early in that respect. Any further discussion?
Yes, Mr Chair, then obviously as the report details, duplication of the library hub at the full specification of the prototype could be done at a reduced cost, realising efficiencies in reproduction of design and construction. So as a staged milestone, I think it'll be a great way to deliver service to the community.
Yeah, I certainly think that a lot of the community is happy with the way that the pod augments the services of libraries. All right, shall we proceed to a vote? Those for? Around the room, that's unanimous. The report is passed, carried, whichever terminology you prefer. On to number 22 on today's agenda, the caption options for council meetings. Calling the relevant officer to take the lead.
Morning again. Sylvia Swelling, Chief Information Officer. This report has been prepared in response to a query at the last council meeting for the options of captioning services for council meetings. For council just to consider. You'll note that there is a recommendation there, but that is purely based on if we choose to go down this path, what might represent the best value for money and the best production performance. So the report's been provided for your consideration, with options ranging from automated free services through to human services that have a higher level of accuracy and efficacy.
Right. Are there any questions?
Through the chair, can you just tell us how much it costs for the Auslan interpreters? It's not in the report, is it?
No, and it wasn't a part of the
No, I know,
scope
but we brought
for
it up
captioning.
and
And they would certainly provide us with a quote, because generally the advantage of an Auslan interpreter is that they need to come to site and they are standing with you, because part of that interpreting is not just what you say, but reading your body language, and there is more to it than just the words.
Yeah, no, I understand that.
And I could certainly come back to you if you're...
Oh, that's all right. I know it was pretty expensive when you were talking about it. Yeah. That's okay. Thank you.
Council has used Auslan services for Auslan Storytime and for cocktail hour events, where we were ensuring that there was full accessibility compliance for deaf participants.
I'm right, Paul.
Yes, just through the chair, I think you touched on the highlights of the considerations. You know, that value for money, the timeliness of it, which preferably would be simultaneous with the meeting, but the accuracy as well. And I think the anecdotal evidence that people have seen is that the accuracy of some of these, you see it on some of the news, TV news, where it's pretty ordinary. So I think that's really important if we're going to progress with this, to ensure that it's got a very high level of accuracy.
Yeah, and certainly option 4 had the highest level of accuracy.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Thank you, Sylvia. Would anybody like to move the acceptance of the report? Councillor Ireland. Second.
The report can't be moved in its current way unless you're just moving...
Move the recommendation, sorry.
No, the recommendation... You need to move something different from the recommendation, essentially.
Oh, okay, it's seeking for us to make a decision.
Can I make an amendment through the chair? Could I make an amendment to it?
Yep.
I called for this report just to have a look at it for the disability sector in Ipswich, but I was not a... That's what I was trying to find out, the cost. I think that for the cost, at the moment, until the approach is better, the service is better, and that there's only one other local government area using it, I'm happy just to receive and adopt the report.
Receive and note.
Right.
Receive and note.
Even note the
Receive the
report.
note.
Yeah.
We haven't had a move yet.
Well, she's just moved it.
Yeah.
Oh, happy to second that. With what the CIO said in the beginning, that the original motion from Councillor Ireland was just to get a report on the options.
Right. Any discussion?
One is concurring with Councillor Tully. We are government, so accuracy in the records that we provide carry weight. When I look at some of the options which only have a 70% accuracy of how I'm being recorded when I'm speaking, sends chills down my spine. I can only imagine how much fun people would have on social media with it. So I very much would prefer, and the ones that are the most accurate options quotes 95%, whether that's how accurate that is, and they're quite expensive. So I think it'd be good to keep a watching brief on, as technology improves, on what we can do, but also when we're out and about, engage with the deaf community as well to see what their needs are as well.
Right, we'll proceed to the vote. Those in favour of the motion on screen? Unanimous? Motion carried. We'll move on to item number 23 on today's agenda. Council community assets and infrastructure named after dismissed former councillors. I call on the relevant officer to lead us yet again.
Point of order, is there any conflict of interest in here? Noting this report?
I don't think so. In the past, that
You're mentioned in, so through the chair, Councillor Tully is mentioned in this. Would that be a conflict of interest?
if I could respond, in the past where reports have been received and noted, for example, community donations which have already been approved, if it was just receiving and noting a report, that it was never regarded as a conflict because it was just receiving and noting it.
So the chair, it's because we're not making a decision. Is that what you're saying, Councillor?
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
What would the CEO?
I would say that it's always the council's responsibility to determine their own position in this matter.
Sound like the local government act.
Through the chair, CEO, if there was a report with you listed in the name, would you stay in the room?
That would be hypothetical. I don't think it would be appropriate for me to answer a hypothetical question like that.
I'll withdraw it then, CEO.
Where's the one that says?
It does refer to Councillor Ireland as well.
Councillor Ireland had no opportunity to, sorry, through the chair, but
So ask that next.
at the beginning of the meeting, so.
Yeah, that's why I'm raising it now, through the chair.
Okay, so how do I read this one where I want to have the other councillors decide if I have a real or perceived conflict of interest? In accordance with section 175E of the Local Government Act 2009, I declare that I may have a conflict of interest in item 20, what was it? 23. Titled, I'll have to go back to see the title.
Council Community Assets.
Council Community Assets and Infrastructures named after dismissed former councillors. I propose to deal with the matter by having the other councillors present decide if they believe there is a real or perceived conflict of interest and whether I can remain in the meeting and take part in the vote on the matter or whether I must leave the meeting place.
Can I make a statement at this stage? For the sake of consistency, I guess, I'll make an identical declaration, but making the point that this is a report for information. It's not recommending taking any action, it's just to receive a note, and I'd propose to, with the consent of the councillors, to remain in the meeting.
Right, well, do we have a discussion on these before we vote?
I guess I put forward that I would expect the fact that the councillors' names are in here, that even though it's just a reporting, not making a decision, that it is a conflict of interest, and it certainly have a. That's my view.
Right, any other councillors?
Through the chair, I concur that I think there's a perceived conflict of interest.
Through the chair, in accepting a report.
We can go to a vote.
Accepting a report. I must admit I'm not from a judicial background. Yeah. Certainly not a local government judge. Are there any further points anyone would like to raise?
Through the chair, I would like to ask Mr. Farmer what his thoughts on this are, because I'm not well versed in deciding on these.
Well, the legislation says that essentially the council make the decision either way. The issue is the matters before the council. The recommendation may not be what the meeting moves, so it's a little bit hard to judge whether it may be a conflict of interest, a more severe conflict of interest, if the meeting at some point decides to take some action as opposed to what the staff recommendation is. So ultimately, councils have to make a determination on the matter.
Through the chair.
It is a conflict of interest, not a material. I can't remember now. Well, the legislation's just changed, but not what we would have called a pecuniary.
It's not a material personal interest. Yeah. It's a conflict of interest or perceived. Sorry, through the chair, CEO. My view is it's a perceived conflict of interest, and I note Councillor Fechner's suggestion that it's just a report for noting that may play some part in deciding whether or not there is a conflict. But it's my view, in deciding on the conflict, it's about the councillors being noted in the report and not necessarily about the procedural matter. The procedural matter before us, that a report be noted, shouldn't be taken into consideration, I guess is what I'm saying, into determining whether or not there is a conflict.
Mr. Chair.
Councillor Milligan.
To progress things, in accordance with section 175E, subsection 4 of the Local Government Act 2009, I move that as there is no personal or financial benefit to both councillors, as this is a report to be received and contents noted, I move that they may participate in the meeting in relation to the matter moving forward.
They require a seconder.
I'd say so. It's semi-procedural, but you might want a seconder.
This is a great learning experience today. Would anybody like to second Councillor Milligan's motion?
Doesn't my one get considered and voted on first?
Pardon?
Doesn't my one?
Well, that's just a... What did you move?
Well, through the chair, Councillor Island moved that we would vote on this.
Yeah, and
I
that's
thought we were
what
in a
Councillor-
discussion period. So wouldn't we look at that as wouldn't that be a foreshadowed?
Let me just have a look what's been moved.
No, well, Councillor, through the chair, Councillor Island made a statement with regards
This is actually moving
to
this is bringing it to the vote.
interest.
Yeah.
And so
Through the chair, it's my understanding that Councillor Island's made a statement that asked for the vote.
And that is the vote. That's
and so I'm moving for a
that's the
vote
form.
to occur.
That's the form of the vote.
That was my understanding.
So it's the question is, should they be able to stay in or not?
Yes. Would any councillor like to second Councillor Milligan's motion?
Yes, I'll second that. And we'll
Seconded by Councillor Fechner. We've had the discussion. Anything further? Right, we'll put the matter for the vote. Those who agree with...
Just confirm that Councillor Tully and Councillor Island can't vote.
Confirm that Councillor Tully and Councillor Island can't vote on this matter. Those who vote for the motion as on the screen, please raise your hand.
Oh, sorry, hang on.
To stay in.
To stay in.
Motion is that they stay in.
But not vote. Hang on. It's about voting tonight.
Yes, this is quite important. Was that the intention?
there's no financial.
Right.
But not vote.
We'll proceed to the vote. Those who vote for.
So that's for them to stay in.
But not vote.
But not vote. Oh, yeah, but not vote.
So councillors Fechner, Doyle, Johnnick, Harding, Milligan, Kunzelman and Madsen have voted for that matter. In this instance, it wouldn't be recorded as a failure to vote?
No.
Would it? No. Just I'd like to ensure that the meeting records that Councillor Island and Councillor Tully haven't voted on this matter as consistent with the legislation.
Have you asked if they're going to vote against it or?
No, we're not permitted to vote. Yeah. But it should record that we didn't vote. And I don't think that's counted in the negative in that situation.
No, it's not. No.
They haven't abstained, they haven't voted for.
The
they haven't
notation in the
failed.
minutes would be that Councillor Island and Tully were unable to vote.
Did not, yeah. Thank you.
So it's decided then that we'll proceed on to the report, but Councillor Island and Councillor Tully will not vote on the matter. I'd like to continue on to the Council Officer.
Good morning, Councillors. Brett Davey, Manager Development Planning. So the report before you is in response to the request from the previous round, outlining any assets that were named after former councillors dismissed. There is an exception, which I've taken the liberty of including Pasali Drive, because technically there was no dismissal involved in that name, but I've included in the report for completeness anyway.
Right, are there any questions from the floor?
So how difficult will it be? And is there a difference between renaming a bridge and renaming a bridge and a park and renaming a road?
Yes, so the current policy says that you can rename if there's been a criminal charge essentially proven, and it would be at Council's discretion to go beyond the policy. In respect to the technical process of renaming a bridge or a street, they're a bit different. So a bridge is relatively straightforward, particularly because it's essentially a resolution and then removing the names, and you don't necessarily have to name a bridge, so you could leave it blank. Streets and roads are not so simple, so inevitably there are properties that access and are addressed to those streets and roads. So if council were of a mind to remove a name or change a name, there are implications on the owners of those properties, so some consultation is required in the procedure. It is worth noting that in many cases that's not a simple inconvenience, so there can be mail redirection requirements, but also some requirements to change mortgage, loan, insurance documents and all those sorts of things. So there are some other implications on the landowners. You know, in terms of the list, there are, particularly with Paul Tully Avenue in Collingwood Park, I think there are almost 60 residents along that street. Basali Drive have in the order of 7 residents or properties along there. So they're the 2 that would be affected by such a decision.
Councillor Kendall.
So essentially, if we consult with the residents, and I think that's required, isn't it? Did you say
Through the
that?
Chair, yes, the procedure suggests consultation and achieving a majority of support before undertaking such a exercise.
So we're essentially asking them if they agree.
Yes.
Okay, and if you get a majority, we could do it.
You could choose to rename.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
I have a question. In regards to the criminal charges aspect, is it implied that we wait until appeals have been exhausted, or we get an indication that an appeal won't be undertaken?
That's not explicit in the policy, but you could take that approach. I suppose it is up to the council and maybe the officers in terms of exercising the delegation, how those clauses are interpreted.
Any further questions?
Through the Chair. Mr Davey, just so I understand, I'll go a bit specific. We do have former Mayor Paul Basali is in jail for a criminal offence, so it has certainly breached that. Is the obligation to still do the 75% consultation, particularly on Basali Drive?
Look, I would categorise Basali Drive as a slightly different example because it wasn't named after Paul. It was named after Paul's parents. So there are some nuances there that probably require some consideration. I think in any event, it would be worthwhile undertaking consultation with the affected property owners before making a decision, regardless of the reasons for the decision, particularly considering the very personal implications of such a decision.
So there would be, for the bridges and parks, sorry, through the Chair, for bridges and parks, what consultation with the community is mandatory?
Look, with a park and a bridge, I don't think there would be the same level of consultation required compared to a road where you've got direct property access. So we'd have to work out a procedure. We haven't really gone through a process to rename a bridge or a park or something of that nature in the current regime. So.
Are there any further questions? Councillor Milliot.
Chair, Mr Davey, I know this question would be quite broad, but is there any indication of what relevant costs would be involved to council with respect to renaming a road or a street?
Yep. So through the Chair, the first obvious cost, aside from officer time in processing a recommendation, is the costs of sign writing and then replacing of naming structures and those sorts of things. Then there is the question of how we deal with potential financial impacts on the constituents that own properties along those streets. How you would quantify that, I don't know, but there would be, if you consider it personally, having to change your mortgage documents, your insurance, it's not simply a matter of getting a mail redirection at a low cost and doing that. There are often legal costs associated with that. So I don't know how you would quantify that, but we could do some more work if that's the desire of the council.
Further through the Chair, Mr Davey, would council at any stage be liable or for any reimbursement to residents due to council's decision on that matter?
To the Chair, look, not directly, but there is always the opportunity for a member of the community to contest the decision of the council if it's had a personal effect on them.
I've been involved in street name changing in the past, and there normally isn't a compensation paid, but these are circumstances are unusual. Often the name changing is for reasons where they're duplicated, or there's some compelling natural reason rather than an issue about concern about the original naming in the first place.
Through the chair, I would just share that there was previously a renaming process undertaken some years ago, and as part of that, I understand that an amount of $500 per resident or per landowner was paid in compensation for the inconvenience.
Through the chair, was that the one at Augustin Heights?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah.
Right, no further questions. Thanks, Brett.
Thank you.
We will need a mover for the acceptance of the report now. Mayor Harding has moved it. A seconder. Councillor Jonik. Any discussion? All right, we'll put it to a vote. Those in favour of accepting the report? Councillor Fechner, Doyle, Jonich, Harding, Milligan, Conzelman and Madsen have voted for that. And again, I think it's important that it's in the minutes that Councillor Tully and Ireland have not voted because they were not able to.
The previous resolution.
As a result of the previous resolution. That's some good language. We will move on to item number 24 on today's agenda, the Court Action Status Report. If we want to discuss some of these in more detail, I believe we'd need to go into closed session. So, be mindful of that. Can you please lead us?
Yes.
Again.
Again, Councillors, Brett Davey, Manager Development Planning. So this report is our standard report advising Council of the current planning and development related court action afoot. In terms of updates there is one that I just highlight for you, which is on page 3 of 5 of the report. At the bottom of that page, that appeal was resolved, but there is some potential pending further action on that, and it's remaining on the list for that purpose, but it may get removed by the next round. But aside from that, I'd take the report as read unless there are any specific questions.
Are there any questions? No.
Sorry, just one question. I won't go into the detail, but the number 2 listed there at Goodna, is that progressing?
Yes, there are materials being exchanged to either continue down the path of a trial or to potentially get to an agreed position on that one. There was a review recently to essentially bring the parties to a tighter time frame on getting that one resolved.
Do you think that'll be resolved, sort of, say, within the next 3 or 4 months?
I think the comment I made last round was I expected it to be resolved months ago. So I think it's speculative. Yeah. So I would like to get any appeal resolved as quickly as possible, because the longer they are around, the more time, money, complexity. But we're really at the mercy of the other party in some of these.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Any further questions? Mayor Harding?
Yeah. Through the chair, page 2, Mr Davey, the one with BioRecycle. It's got a next court review date on the 29th of May. Where are we at with this particular court action?
So the court review was to check on the progress of the parties in coming to a resolution of the appeal or progressing to a trial. There is no progress at this point in time. We are still working through the issues afoot in the appeal.
Okay. Through the chair, just the next one with Land Track. If anything is confidential, please let us.
Yeah, I will.
Close. Yeah.
Thank you.
I see likely orders for preliminary joint reports due in a few days on the 26th of June.
Yes.
Is that still tracking?
Yes. Yeah. So just as a general, through the chair, as a general rule, we make it mandatory that we meet our court dates. Now, if other parties don't meet their court dates, we still strive to meet ours, and that's us acting in the best interests of the council as a model litigant.
Right. Thank you. And through the chair, the next one with Clean Away, solid waste. Appeal was at 4101. Is this the one where it's the additional 13 metres
Yes.
height?
Yes, additional 13 metres height.
Is that tracking?
Yeah. So there's currently some work on a proposed change through the court process by Cleanaway. I think there's documentation published on the court's website about that, and that hasn't yet been resolved.
Okay.
Yeah. So that matter will be finalised before the substantive matter progresses.
And for page 4 of 5, with Austin BMI, again, at court date for the 25th of June. Is there anything else to report on this since this report was made?
Not at this point in time. Oh, sorry, through the chair, not at this point in time.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Would any councillors like to move that the report be accepted? Mayor Harding, any seconder?
Yeah, I'll second.
Councillor Tully? Any discussion? We'll put that to a vote. Those in favour of accepting the report? Around the room, it's unanimous. The motion's carried. We'll move on to item 25 on today's agenda, the exercise of delegation report. Call on the relevant officer.
Lucky last. Yes, so this report, through the chair, this report is a report back or reflection of our activity in terms of exercising of delegations to decide applications. So there's a quite significant list there. You'll see over the last period. I'd take that as read.
Right, are there any questions? Thank you. Would anybody like to move the acceptance of this report? Councillor Fechner, seconder. Councillor Milligan. Any discussion? Right, we'll put that to a vote that the report be accepted. Those in favour? Around the room. It's unanimous. It's been accepted and carried. That brings to a close today's agenda. Declare the meeting closed at 11:58.